Here is Jakob Nielsen's keynote speech from the Nielsen Norman Group UX Conference in Copenhagen, Denmark.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, it's great to be back here in Copenhagen, and it's actually really nice to have this our conference here at the Royal Hotel, because it's a masterpiece of modernist architecture. But beyond that, it's also an early example of kind of total design, as we're advocating, because the architect didn't just design the building, but he also designed the draperies, the carpeting, even the lamps, and even the chairs, and even the cutlery, silverware in the restaurant. So all of this was designed to form like a total user experience. Unfortunately, they've actually changed the carpet since then, so this is not the design. But back in 1960, it was an early example of total design, which is what we advocate. So that's really kind of an interesting thing for a user experience conference to be in this type of environment. In fact, many of the chairs that were designed for this hotel have since gone on to become classic. Like you're sitting on some of these famous chairs, and they named the conference room after the famous chairs. And the A chair is one of the most famous ones. It's actually even found in San Francisco Airport today. Even though I have to say, I think it looks better in the lobby of this hotel, which is where it was designed for. But definitely a famous site. I want to talk about two different sort of main themes today, which relates to user experience. That it is something that is not romantic, it's something that's systematic. Good user experience comes from following methodology, from knowing about concepts and theories and principles, not from wishing for it or throwing things at the wall or any of those type of ideas. At the same time, user experience is not really driven by technology, it's driven by focus on humans. And I think it's quite often in at least the trade press and at trade shows and other conferences and ours, there's a lot of focus on the technology. And I really want to drive it back to the focus on the people, on the humans, because that's what user experience is about. But there has been a lot of technology, which I'll get to a little later, some examples. There have been a lot of generations of technology, of user interface technology that we have been through, certainly in my career, many different ones. And what usually happens when we get a new user interface technology is that it's actually used really poorly. The first designs to come out are confusing and terrible. And so that's really often new fancy means a step backwards in usability. But then on the other hand, if it in fact is a kind of good technology, then eventually we learn how to use it and we get kind of 2 steps forward. So new technology usually equates to 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But then if you do the math, it is 1 step forward net outcome for the users. But I just really detest, why do we have to always have that step back? Every time we do something new. And I think we ought to be better by now. But it's like the lesson from so many years that every time there's something new, we have a step back. So that's kind of one of the things I want to campaign against, because I get easily annoyed. And it's something that really does annoy me. And so I think we need to kind of rely on, we know things about what makes things easy. And by way of kind of analogy, I want to talk about another field, which is astronomy, and talk about what causes a solar eclipse. And so this is the guy who kind of discovered that. But before him, the thought was that the solar eclipse was a punishment from the gods. Your king had angered Zeus, and as a result, Zeus kind of darkened the sun over your country. And this honestly was a really plausible explanation. Because if you think about it, those ancient kings had always, given their lifestyle, had always done something to anger the gods. And so anytime there was a solar eclipse, you could kind of think about, last week the king did this terrible thing, and so that's why. So it was a plausible explanation, but of course the wrong explanation. And it's a little bit the same as with UX, that often we kind of end up getting the wrong explanations. Well, Thales of Miletus, he was the first person to predict the solar eclipse based on actually understanding the mechanics or the principles of what happens, which is that the moon goes in front of the sun and casts a shadow on the earth. And once you know that, you can predict the next one, which is what he did. And it happened, right? Similarly with user experience, once we know the principles of what causes things to be easy or difficult, we have a better time predicting or driving our design in an appropriate direction. And actually there's another analogy that kind of matches with the solar eclipses, which is that today the astronomers can predict like to the second when the next solar eclipse will be many, many years in advance. And of course, Thales of Miletus, he didn't have those precise big telescopes, and no telescope in fact, right? So his prediction was more like on this day there'll be a solar eclipse, which happened. So very similar to that, in user experience today, we don't have the ability to predict to like several decimal points, like exactly how much your conversion rate will go up if you make a certain design change. We don't have that accuracy that astronomers do, because that's a more advanced field, since they started 2,500 years ago and we only started maybe 50 years ago. I mean, I certainly wasn't the first. So about 50 years ago, maybe people started studying this field. So that's very, very new in comparison to astronomy. And so today we have very rough, coarse understanding of UX, and so we can't predict it that accurately. But that doesn't mean we know nothing. So we're beyond that stage of thinking that Zeus is angry at us if our design fails. That's not why. So I want to talk a little bit about some of these things that we know about user experience, the kind of types of things we know. And so you know that many people, when they give these type of keynote speeches, they like to illustrate their examples with photographs that they download from Flickr, right? That's sort of a common thing these days. And I just don't like to be like all other speakers. So instead, I'm going to illustrate my examples with old 19th century paintings from Denmark. And so here's my first painting. And what does this show? A rhetorical question, because it obviously shows a bunch of grapes. And this is partly because, before the photography became common, it was the #1 job of an artist to paint things to look like what they were. Like if you're going to hire Rembrandt to paint your uncle, it better look like your uncle, right? So similarly here, if you're going to have a painter paint a painting of grapes, they should look like grapes and look delicious, and you go, I want to eat that juicy grape. And that's what he did. But beyond that, one of the other reasons you immediately see what this is simplicity. He didn't do a lot of other stuff. And I think a lot of websites in particular, but also some other interfaces today, are not like this painting. They're like an angry fruit salad. All kind of things just bunched together and mushed up, and not necessarily as advertising, and this one single juicy grape. So that's one of the types of things we know about user experience, a really broad principle, simplicity. If we do fewer things, people are more likely to be able to understand the things that we do. And so that's one of what I mean by we say we know things. We do know that simplicity works. Now, let me show another example of a painting here. We have a nice group of farmyard animals by Theodore Philipson. And this is a naturalist painting, which means that if we look at the duck, it looks like a duck. Or if we look at one of the cows, it looks like a cow. So far, so good. But what if we put the duck next to the cow? Man, that's a big duck. It's like Attack of the Killer Ducks. This movie that has not actually been made yet, but that's like the poster from that movie, right? And but no, that's not actually the Attack of the Killer Ducks. The duck is just physically, graphically bigger because it's in the foreground, right? And so this is an example of a painterly technique called repoussoir, which means put an object in the foreground that pushes to the back the rest of the picture. That creates a sense of depth, even though obviously a painting is a two-dimensional object, we all know that, but it creates a sense of depth in the painting. And so this is similar to like a more specific design guideline as opposed to this broad principle of simplicity. So the equivalent in web design would be things like, if you're going to do search, you make it a box, a type-in field, and you put that search box in the upper right-hand corner, and you put the logo in the upper left-hand corner. And if you follow those specific design guidelines, people will be better able to use your site. They'll focus more on your content, your products, your offerings, your message, and not be confused about how to operate this website. So now we know about this idea of putting something in the foreground, but not just put a duck in the foreground. Here's this is a city painting now. So what is this broom doing in the lower left hand of this picture? Man, that's repoussoir, right? It's an object in the foreground that pushes the rest of the picture more in the back and creates a sense of depth. So you can see this though from down, so it looks like it's actually from downtown Copenhagen, even though it's just a flat picture. So, these guidelines do work, and they can be used in a lot of different contexts. Now let's look at a very different, these are kind of naturalist paintings where they try to give a three-dimensional sense by this repoussoir technique. Now this painting, on the other hand, doesn't have that duck in the foreground. But if we look at this, we should kind of blur it a little bit. You'll notice it's really just like three stripes of color. That's this painting, three stripes of color, no three-dimensional effect at all. It's the sky, the land, and the water. And yet, we can interpret this immediately, even though it's not as naturalist as the other paintings. We can tell the sky is above the land, and we can tell that the water is in front of the land. But how can we tell that? Because honestly, if you look at the graphics, the water could be below the land, right? And the sky could be next to the land or something like that. The land could be next to the sky or whatever. The reason we can interpret this painting despite lack of these 3D effects is because of another UX principle, which is consistency of the user's expectations in the real world. And so you guys have all been out in nature. You've seen lakes and fields and the sky above the land and things like that many times. And so you know that when you see something like this, the sky is above the land, that way up, and the water is in front of the land this way. And so because of our expectations, as long as they follow our expectations, not like a very modern painting that's weird, we can immediately understand what it shows. Here we go back and we look at an older painting style again, very realistic style. And so this is a painting from London. You can see St. Paul's Cathedral here, the monument to the fire of London, and you can see smack in the middle of the painting, the London Bridge. Now, those of you here who are from London may say now, well, that's not how the London Bridge looks. And it's true, that's not how the London Bridge looks today. The bridge in this painting is today in Arizona, in the United States, as a tourist attraction. It was moved brick for brick to the US and built back up in Arizona. But back when Holger Brackmann was painting this painting in 1874, the bridge was still there. And there's been a London Bridge in that exact spot since the days of the Roman Empire. So almost 2,000 years London Bridge has been there in the same spot. In those 2,000 years, many different designs of the bridge, many different engineering technologies used to construct ever bigger and more solid bridges, for 2,000 years, but always in the same place. And the reason for that is that that's the place where you want to cross a river, and that's the place where you have different roads go to and all that, so that's convenient to have a bridge there. And this is my example of a more kind of broad principle again of user experience, which is the persistence of infrastructure and of social organization. And so if you're designing something for a big system, big organization, like maybe a big city or a big company or something like that, you have to really figure out the way that organization works and its existing systems and infrastructures and way of working and way of thinking. Because if you try to kind of disrupt too much of that, you may quite likely fail. Or conversely, if you're designing something completely new, we have to kind of be aware of our responsibility, because we're actually often creating some of this infrastructure and thoughts that could be there long after our specific designs or individual screen designs, they're long gone. But the infrastructure, the systems or the processes that we build up, they can remain for a very long time. Maybe not 2,000 years for the case of your next project, but you never know. And so think about it. That's why we're going to study these things more carefully when we do this type of design. Well, I want to talk about a number of different user interface technologies that we've been through, and most of them follow this kind of life cycle that I'm depicting here. And so we start from the very top, and the circle is called the magic bullet. That is that a new technology, people initially are very enthusiastic and thrilled and happy about this new technology being the solution to all our problems. So if only we could speak to the computer, there would be no usability problems, right? Or if only, think back 20 or 30 years, like, if only we could have graphical user interfaces, there would be no usability problems. And of course we know this is not true. In fact, the opposite is true, because when we move to a new user interface technology, usually the first designs to launch are technology-driven designs by people who are so enthusiastic about this new technology that they forget about the humans. And so often, I mean, the iPad was one of the worst examples of this. Almost all of the first launched apps for the iPad were completely wacky and weird, and when we tested them, people couldn't use them. But this is true for so many other technologies as well. So we get to this problem of technology-driven bad design, and then the next that happens is I call like the UX panic, which is that this was supposed to be so good, and then it's so bad, and then what's wrong? And so now people like us come in and we say, okay, research why it doesn't work. We're going to do some studies, right, and figure out. And after that, we can move to the next stage, which is, okay, now we know what not to do. Let's now figure out what works and what to do. So we research, additional, more useful design options. All of that will then crystallize into best practice guidelines. And once we know how to design for this technology, by now we're up here, because this takes a few years to go through this cycle. But now we're a bit like, it's old technology. But at least we know how to do it, how to use it, how to design for it, how to make good products, high usability, great user experience with that generation of user interface technology. And by then it's usually time to go through the cycle again, because there's going to be some other new thing that comes out. And what I would really like is we could bypass this kind of right-hand side of this chart and not have to have all the bad design, right? Why do we have to suffer that? But let's talk about a few examples of some specific user interface technologies. So first of all, personal computer graphical user interfaces. They're in that kind of last circle stage of being old technology, but we really know how to do it. We have a lot of insight into how to make a good graphical user interface, how to make a good PC application, all of that. So they've been through that. There was definitely a lot of bad applications in the old days, but very confusing PC systems, but now we know how to do it. For the web, we are almost there. I don't think we're quite there yet, but we're at that stage where the best practice guidelines have definitely been defined. We have actually thousands, literally thousands of web design guidelines to tell us, how to make a good website. Unfortunately, not everybody actually follows those. They're not accepted that the web is an established, design idiom. So we still get some weirdo sites to come out from time to time, but mainly we do have the best practices known, and so pretty soon we click over into that, it's an established technology. Agile development, on the other hand, we're not there yet. We are at this stage where we know that if we just do Agile the way it was kind of envisioned for programmers, we will have bad user experience as a result. The original idea was great for programming things, implementing things, but not for designing things. And so that we know doesn't work, and we have found out kind of why, and that kind of the bad things are kind of well documented. And we have some insights already now into how to do better. In fact, we had an entire one-day seminar today about how to do better Agile user experience. So we do know a lot of good advice on how to do it right. But that said, I don't think we have it 100% nailed yet, so I don't think we can claim to say it's a solved problem. But we know a lot about how to make it work. The same is actually true for designing for mobile devices. We have been through that phase of having a lot of bad design, finding out why those designs are bad, finding out why they don't work. And we are now we have a number of kind of good apps or good mobile designs to look at, and we're kind of getting to the point where we sort of are getting ready to say we know how to make mobile work, but I don't think we're quite there yet. And one really kind of striking example of that is the entire area of responsive design, which quite often means bad design, because you can't really have exactly the same on the big screen and the small screen. So we have to figure out how to make the design kind of work on all the different screen sizes, and that we can make it display on all the different screen sizes. That's a technology issue. That is know how to do that. But make a good user experience on different screen sizes is a much harder question. And so we're in this sort of stage where we try to figure out what are the things that trip us up when doing responsive design. So that's a little bit of an earlier stage. And so by way of illustrating that, let me return to my example with the farmyard animal painting. And this guy, he really loved to paint cows, So here's another painting by the same guy. And what's the difference between these two paintings? Well, one thing you might notice is here, this painting has very long shadows, and so that might lead you to think that it was probably painted like sort of sometime in the evening, maybe like getting closer to sunset. That seems reasonable. But that's not really the big difference between these two paintings. You will never guess, because I'm only showing you photographs of these, and when you only see photographs, you don't get what's really the true striking difference between these two paintings. You've got to see them for real. One is huge, and one is small. And size matters. And they're really different experience-wise to see the big painting or to see the small painting. So the last thing I want to talk about is artificial intelligence. So that's at that early stage now where it's being very much hyped up right now, and people are really thinking that that's going to be our salvation for user experience. I think it could be like this painting of Mount Vesuvius. So one possible future is that it's like a beautiful view, you can enjoy it when you're on vacation, that this woman is doing. Or it could erupt and blow up and bury our city, like it did with Pompeii. So Mount Vesuvius has those two aspects to it, right? And I think AI is the same. It could definitely have some good things to it, but it could just as well create a lot of nasty trouble for us. So what is the artificial intelligence user interface? What is going to be the user experience on that? And I think there's sort of two different ways of looking at it. So one is really, as I've been saying, it's like the same as all the things I've just been talking about. Every other technology is like, okay, people are very thrilled about it, but it's not going to be as good, and it's going to have a lot of trouble early on. And I do believe that. I mean, I do believe that in that AI is like everything else, because when we've seen it so many times, history will repeat itself one more time also. But there's another way of looking at AI as well, which is actually in certain ways, some kind of qualitative ways, different than the other user interface technologies that we have had. So I like to discuss those differences. But let's remember this kind of the first point that people who are like driven by technology enthusiasm are going to overhype things like this, and it's our job to kind of like be the reality check and say, well, remember the people, right? Okay, so let's talk about AI. I'm going to start from kind of the lowest level of the interaction design, which is the lexical level of the kind of the words that we are communicating to the computer. And so the big difference between AI and every previous user interface technology is that most of these AI systems are recognition-based user interfaces. By that I mean, well, by contrast, you could say that, let's say a graphical user interface. If I click an icon, I click that icon. There's no real debate about whether, I mean, I click the icon, that's the icon I clicked. End of the story. But in AI, if I speak a word, or if I handwrite something, or if I make a gesture to one of these things, I mean, there is a debate about what I did. Which word did I say? What word did I write? Which of the different command gestures did I make? Well, I mean, it's going to interpret or recognize what I do, but it's going to do it wrong some of the time. Whereas if I click an icon, I click that icon, and there's no discussion, right? And so the fact that there's going to be misrecognition means that we have to have a way of recovering the misrecognitions. So that adds a layer of complexity to the interaction design, which is right there at disadvantage. Now, this will always be with us, but it's certainly getting better and better, and actually it's getting better and better at a very astonishingly rapid pace. So by way of example, I'm going to refer to Google now. It got 5 times better in the last 4 years. I mean, this is like unheard of. So 4 years ago, they misrecognized 25%, so 1/4 of all words were misrecognized when you tried to say something to it. And just a few weeks ago, they announced that they were now down to 5% misrecognition rate. So that they cut the error rate by a factor of 5, so in 4 years. So that's hugely impressive. And I think it's kind of easy to predict that improvement will continue, not exactly how fast, but it will definitely continue. So they'll get it down to 1% wrong, and then some years later, maybe even down to like 0.1% wrong. So 1 out of every 1,000 words wrong. But then I think we can say, okay, it's still not perfect, but it's pretty good to perfect. And beyond that, computers can be better than reality. So it's not just a matter of the computer being as good as a person at recognizing speech, but it can also do things like accommodate accents, which can be difficult for people. If you're used to hearing words pronounced in a certain way and somebody pronounces them in a different way, that can definitely cause problem for a person. But the computer can just be taught to recognize all of these different accents. You know, and one day they'll teach them how to recognize a Danish accent. So definitely there are possibilities for improvements here, and things getting better than reality. So I think it's not all that bad. But let's look at the next level up, which is the syntax level. So I can combine my words into an actual command or instruction to the computer. And these are questions like, what can I say, when can I say it? And here we have certainly already, we can see some issues in that many of these current systems have very awkward ways you have to phrase things. You have to like work on its kind of rules as opposed to human rules. So you have to say things like, okay Google, or hey Siri, which annoys me no end. Because that's not a normal way of acting. I mean, I don't go around saying, hey wife, if you want to talk to your wife. So let's not do that, right? So that's really very, very annoying. And even if we get over those type of annoyances, there's also the deeper problem of reformulation, which is that if I state my problem in a certain way to the computer, it's not always kind of the right way, and sometimes I want to get alternatives, a variance of what I said. And that's something that's actually quite well supported in graphical user interfaces, because the computer can show me not just you ask for this, but here are some related items that you might be interested in as well. And this is really well suited for scanning over a two-dimensional, particularly if you have a big screen, you can really do a lot of great work there. And this hugely improves conversion rates in sales, by the way. So that's good. Whereas in speech or any kind of linear user interface, it becomes very awkward to present these kind of alternatives. So that's one thing that's an issue here. And so people have to kind of adapt to how the computer needs to work, which is contrary to our basic ideology. I mean, if there's any one ideology we have in user-centered design, it's that the technology should adapt to the people, and the people should be like they are and be left to live their lives. So that's very, very unfortunate. There's also right now much kind of initiatives to put a lot of these speech recognition systems into cars and put apps into cars, so you can sit and do manage your calendar and things like that while you're driving until you smack right into something, because there's a huge risk of driver distraction for those type of interfaces, and I think they could easily end up killing large numbers of people. And you know that one of the biggest causes of traffic accidents these days is people being on their mobile phones. And when I say being on, I don't mean like you're holding your phone hands-free is just as dangerous, because it's not a problem of whether your hand is on the phone or the steering, because you have two hands, right? But what the problem is the cognitive load, the cognitive distraction. If I'm talking to somebody who's not in the car, my mind is kind of like halfway out of the car, and your reaction time goes up, and your accident rate goes up, and it's about as dangerous to have a phone call as it is to be drunk when you're driving. And if it's that dangerous to talk to a person, just imagine how dangerous it is to try to manage your calendar, right? I mean, the cognitive load on that is going to be really, really nasty. So those are kind of like issues in that. And there's generally speaking a lot of talk right now about conversational interfaces, and it would be dangerous in the cars, but even for other systems, I don't think they're necessarily going to be that good. So one of the reasons that so much talk about that is WeChat. So WeChat is the most successful system in China these days. And since China is the world's #1, online market, of course everybody else is very excited about what works in China, and they want to learn from the Chinese and everybody. So that makes all sense. But they're learning the wrong lesson from WeChat, because WeChat is called chat for historical reasons, because a long time ago that's what they did. But today, that's not why people in China use WeChat. So we did some research in China with Chinese users on how they use WeChat, what they think about WeChat, and so forth. So this is just one example of a mental model that we had the users draw, so one person's mental model. You can see that the chat is kind of like, there's a peripheral part of this mental model. It was much central, not just for this person, but for a lot of users, was much more central at these things like ability to scan QR codes, like a version of barcodes, I guess, So kind of integration with the physical world, which is a really good thing that WeChat has achieved. Or also other integration abilities that they have in WeChat, like very simple payment across different, both physical world and online world, and person-to-person payment, and all these things are very smooth and nicely integrated in WeChat. So integration of useful facilities, integration with the physical world, those are reasons people use WeChat. And the way they use it is quite often by using menus or graphical user interfaces, very rarely actually by using chat. So it's a misconception with this idea that WeChat is a so-called conversational user interface. Then moving up one level to the task level, which is like I'm trying to actually get something done with the computer. There's a big, truly big difference here between AI and traditional systems, because traditional computer systems, they do as they're told. And this is both good and bad. I mean, it's good that the computer does it as told, but it's bad because what I tell it to do is not always what I want it to do. And that's the problem, of course, of people not really understanding computer facilities and so forth, right? So we know that people will ask for the wrong thing quite often. But that said, it's still kind of a comforting feeling the computer does it as told. In contrast with AI, the computer does as it pleases, or as it thinks would be good. So the computer will get agency in these AI-driven systems. And that raises an entirely new kind of aspect of user experience that we have not otherwise been so much into. And I mean, some of the sort of simple examples of this that we already see now is like these examples of if you, let's say somebody was on Amazon.com, they were searching for things like pregnancy books and baby books and stuff like that, and like a year later, they still get pregnancy books, recommended. So I think they actually fixed that one by now, but that was for a while anyway, the situation. So the thing is that the AI system has to understand the bigger context of use, not just kind of the specific simple things like, if I buy one book, I will buy more similar books, but maybe not forever for certain types of problems, right? For certain types of issues. So let me show you another painting here. This one looks like it's a ship in the middle of the city. Very odd, doesn't make sense. No, that's not actually what it is, right? But if we recognize each element in the painting, we can recognize a ship and we can recognize buildings, so our first thought is, man, a ship in the middle of downtown. No. What happened was in the good old days, they used to have these docks where they would build ships, and around those docks were warehouses, and so that's what's happening. So you can just see it's actually a ship that's kind of being built. It's almost finished, but in the process of being built, and there's some warehouses around it. So understanding the context is crucial for interpreting this picture correctly. Not just recognizing each element, right? Then that will lead you very much astray. Your first thought will be wrong. Finally, with AI, the more kind of societal, really broad-based question here. So I have here a list of what today is the most famous AI products. And what characterizes this list is they're all from huge, I mean truly huge companies. And that's because it has turned out that the best way to do artificial intelligence is by machine learning from immense data sets. I mean, data sets are so huge and immense that they're mainly collected by various privacy violations. But anyway, so then these big companies have them, but no other people don't have them. And so I think that is one of the really biggest challenges and problems with AI is if we're going to be restricted to being driven by basically like a handful of huge corporations. Because if we think back to some of the previous revolutions in user interface technology, they really had the opposite effect. Like the PC revolution meant that now thousands of companies could create software and could make applications and sell applications. In the past, with the mainframe era, it was only a few companies like big iron type of organizations that would make applications, and the software that back then was terrible as a result. But with PC software, thousands of companies made PC software. That they were able to do that by this new technology. And sure enough, many PC applications had bad design. Definitely, but also many had good design and had a lot of interesting innovations in user interfaces and did new things and empowered a lot of like more average normal users to be able to use computers. So the PC revolution was a huge advance in usability. And similarly for the web revolution, but even more so, because now it's not just thousands of companies that could create PC applications, but millions of companies could create websites. And basically, any company in the world could just put a website up anytime they wanted it to, right? They could create new design ideas, new features, new services, new products. They could do a lot of different things. And again, 100%, so many bad websites. Particularly, like in the .com bubble days, so many bad websites, but also so many good websites. And again, when you have millions being attempted, even if many are bad, there's going to be a lot left over that are good. And so that was the beauty of those two revolutions in user interface technology, was that broadening up the base and broadening up the number of things that were done and services offered, and just a sort of generally speaking diversity, so that they would cater to you whatever you wanted. It wasn't just like, this is what you do. It's really a big brother society we may very easily get into in this AI system if that turns out to be the only way it's done. So, we're concluding. I'd like to remind you today is Wednesday, and Wednesday is Odin's Day, or Odin's Day. And Odin was the king of the gods in the religion of my bloodthirsty ancestors, the Vikings. Just as tomorrow is Thursday, which is Thor's Day, or the Thunder God Day. But anyway, let's go back to Odin. So today is Odin's Day. So Odin was the king of the gods, but he had many names. He was also called the All-Father. Odin was also called Old One Eye, because he only had one eye. Now, why did the king of the gods only have one eye? Because he had sacrificed his other eye to gain wisdom. And this story, by the way, tells you that the Vikings are not as bloodthirsty as the modern television shows like to make them out. I mean, you look at television, the Vikings are just like, killers, and they rape and they pillage, and they're just really nasty guys. But they actually respected wisdom to the extent that the king of the gods had sacrificed his eye to gain one eye to gain wisdom. So wisdom is something that we in our field gain by observing the users. That's, I think, is a really core thing in user experience, is the user. Right? Go back to the people, go back to the humans, observe the people, observe what they do. Let them use different designs, see which works, which don't work. So, and that's the way we gain our principles, both the very specific design principles and our broad interaction principles as well. Both of those two, which we can be nice and call wisdom. Our wisdom, UX wisdom, comes from observing the users. And I think it's kind of very happy that we can gain our wisdom by observing users, by looking, and you guys, you do that, and you don't even have to sacrifice your eye, and it'll be all good. So thank you very much.